Welcome, everybody. This is Bart Sharp of Becoming Quantum Conscious on United Public Radio Network and UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 107.7 and 105.3 out of the beautiful city of New Orleans, Louisiana. And we are seen all over the world, way beyond New Orleans, thanks to the internet and UPRN, but also thanks to Roku, which we're now on Roku, so you can see us on television, and we're all so movie star good looking. So it's just eye candy everywhere. And also you can see us on YouTube, Facebook, and other means. Just look at our website and see all of those at UNPR. And my name is Bart Sharp with Becoming Quantum Conscious, and I am still in lovely France, as I will be for the entire month of June. And it's amazing here. The reason that I come here is because of all of the power spots, all the sacred sites, the history. And this land is ancient, I dare say. If you want to be immersed in the divine feminine, this is the place. As a matter of fact, this is just an average day. I'm taking a friend out and about this week, and we went to Renly Chateau to be in the Church of Mary Magdalene, a great historical place, and it was also mentioned in the wonderful book by Dan Brown, The Da Vinci Code. And then we hopped across the valley and up this very steep hill, which my car almost got stuck, but of course, being an expert driver and tour guide, I did not get stuck. And we went to the caves of Mary Magdalene and went to these awesome caves of just ancient. I think they stem from the time of Isis, and I really believe Isis was worshipped here. And so then we saw that and went into the caves and meditated, particularly the feminine cave, which happens to be much like the shape of a yoni. It's very mystical and natural, yet looking peculiarly different than a regular cave, I dare say. Then ended out the evening or afternoon by going to a place where a lot of white goddess and Mother Mary sightings have appeared. The White Lady, as they call her, or the White Goddess, or Mother Mary, appearing as a white being walking around in the field. Of course, that was one of those French secrets that only you will know if you hang out here long enough, as some of us do, and we hear all of these amazing stories about how mystical Southwest France is. And we're talking in the corner right into the Pyrenees Mountains, really close to the Mediterranean Ocean, right in that little corner by the country of Spain and Andorra. And so this country, and I had to show you my shirt right now. It's pastis pétanque. Pétanque is this game that's played here by all the locals, where they take their metal balls and throw them at the other person's balls that are on the ground that are metal, and they all run into each other. And there's must be some sort of sophisticated strategy. But pastis is, this drink they drink that takes the tension down, so nobody freaks out if they win or lose. They just chill out and play a nice game. Total, normal, comfortable French life. So with that all said, there's lots of people have been attracted to this area. And I have one tonight that is like many of us. We're drawn here for various reasons. And we may be doing all sorts of things, whether that be writing, an artist or mystic, or just maybe a new age maghead or something. But we all come. And today we have Catherine de Courcy, who is an author of 20 books. And she is from Dublin, Ireland, but now lives in Pouvert, France, which is really close to where I live in Quatum, France. And they're just wonderful French towns in the Pyrenees Mountains. We're at the foothills of the Pyrenees. And Welcome to the show, Catherine. I'm so glad that you're here today.
Thanks, Bart. It's lovely to be here.
Yes, and Catherine is such a passionate writer. I have one of her books called, let's see, it looks like it's on there, Montsegur by Catherine de Courcy. And you'll see this mountain up there, and it looks like that's a little bitty fortress on a little pog, as Catherine describes in her book. Like you climb up the pog if you are a Cathar and living in this fortress. And of course, when you see this in real life, it doesn't look like a pog. It's like huge, and you just wonder how the French army and the Catholic army came in to conquer it, but they did. And it's just such a passionate book. That was, if there was anything that I described this book as, it's passionate, because these people, the Cathars, who Catherine writes about, are very unique people. Uh, they're very dedicated to a spiritual journey that is quite unique and special, to probably very different than anybody that follows the teachings of Jesus. And what was there anything that you would like to begin with that statement of how you feel about the dedication and passion of the Cathar people?
Um, yeah, I guess probably just to give a very brief summary of what happened on Montsegur in 1244, and really what then ignited the passion for me, the big question, which was, why did they make the choice they made in 1244? So
What,
very briefly,
what was that short? Yes, I've kind of spun you in this without any history, and
yeah,
kind of not forgetting that not everybody knows who the Cathars are.
well, that's why I thought I'd give you that, and then I'd come to the big question.
All right.
Because the big question was what caught me. So I first went up Montsegur in 2008, and I was told the bare bones of the history. They were medieval Christians who were heretics, which meant they were Christians who didn't go along with the Roman Catholic dogma, and they were being persecuted horribly. They had been persecuted horribly since the beginning of the 13th century, and by 1244 they were now down to several small communities, and the peak of Montsegur was one of those small communities. There were about 500 people living there. Of those 500 people, about 200 people devoted their lives to prayer. So it was like a monastery. And then there were family members. There was a garrison of about 100 men. And then there were people who did the artisan work, the bread, the blacksmith, and so on. So on the top of that little mountain, you could see on the front of the book, lived 500 people. And Rome decided that it had to go. They had to be destroyed. Now, if you come to Montsegur, you will see it's this beautiful, isolated peak in the middle of a magnificent landscape, far away from everything and everyone. And why Rome would be bothered is one of those questions.
Yes.
And the one thing about Montsegur is you can see it from quite far away. So if you like, it was a beacon of light to people living in the region. But one way or the other, Rome arranged that a French army, an army from the north of 10,000 mercenary troops would surround the Pog of Montsegur until it capitulated. So for 8 months, the small community held out because of the layout of there's only one way up that Pog even today. It's a single track. So the small garrison of 100 men were able to keep this enormous mercenary army at bay. After 8 months, the French army broke through, and 2 months later, the community on Montsegur chose to surrender. And then in a very, this is where it gets really interesting, in a very unusual move, the French gave them a choice. They were given 2 weeks to put their affairs in order. And after those 2 weeks, if they agreed to submit to Rome and swear allegiance to Rome and accept Rome as the head of the Christian church on earth, they could go free and they wouldn't lose their property. They wouldn't lose anything. If, however, they refused to accept Rome, as the head of the Christian church on earth, they would die in a fire. And of that group of people, 220 chose to die in a fire. And that for me was the huge big question. Why? Why would you choose to die on a fire when there were several other ways out, human terms? And that's what started me on the big journey of writing that book, which took me into all sorts of places so that I could try and get into that question.
It is. And I think people are still pondering that question today, and also being inspired with it, with such a dedicated group of people that believe deeply in a spiritual quest. And what I have learned of it is that there was a real equality between men and women, that they both read and wrote and read, or read and write. Why am I not getting that right? So I think we got that message across. So here was an educated people in general, and not only just the spiritual people or the people highly committed to spirituality. This was common amongst Cathar culture, which went from north of Toulouse all the way down to the coast. So we're talking a really big area.
Big and powerful. They would have stretched all the way across northern Italy as well, Bart. And this is one of the things, because they were highly influential. It was the land of the troubadours, of courtly love, of music, of poetry. It was a prosperous time, a very prosperous time. The population was growing because it was warmer, agriculture was developing. And this part of the south of France was prosperous. And they had their own language, the language of the Occitan language. And their influence was spreading. As well as that, they were very tolerant people. They had Jewish communities living amongst them. And there were female leaders. So it was a time, they were a people that were as you say, well educated. And they did one of the things which the Roman Church couldn't tolerate, which is that they read the scriptures. And it was heresy to read the scriptures. So things that to the modern mind can't comprehend. But it was all a matter of keeping it simple. The other thing that's very huge in terms of who the Cathars were is that they're holy people. I call them holy people. They didn't call themselves anything. They're generally referred to as the perfects.
It was just the life.
Yeah, they live very simple lives.
Yeah, they're kind of like Buddhist in ways.
They were Buddhists, they were monks, they devoted their lives to prayer, and they lived very simple lives. They didn't accumulate wealth. And around them, the Roman Catholic priests, God help them, tended to be not as well educated, and the larger centers of the church accumulated wealth. So it was an uncomfortable relationship between the people who followed a Christianity that may well have come directly from Jesus and Mary Magdalene, right back from the Gnostics, right back from the first century, in collision with a Roman church dogma.
Yeah, and it must have been a little intimidating because the Roman Catholics made reading outlawed. I mean, there must have been so many things the Cathars were wary of that if found out, they would be going against church law, so to speak.
Well, it's the reading of the scriptures. And again, when you look at the early history and the development of the scriptures, you can kind of understand the reluctance of allowing everybody to go interpreting the scriptures as they wished. But in some ways, the Roman Church went further than that and said that only their own people could interpret the scriptures, that they were in Latin and so on. Whereas having the scriptures in the vernacular, having teachings.
Yes.
In the vernacular, at a time when we have to remember this was the 13th century, these people would have thought completely differently to us. Their relationship with the earth and with the planet and with life would have been quite different to ours, and it was much more immediate to them. So to seek that guidance and to have that guidance available through their local holy people was something that they had, and that if you wanted to control them, those who wanted to control wouldn't have been happy about.
Yes, and they weren't.
Mm.
And independent, free-thinking minds are hard to control, uh, still today. So, they were such an inspiration on that level. But one of the things you bring up in your book, Massinger, a novel, uh, is that each Cathar, and this totally surprised me. And the more I think about it, the more profound I think this concept is that each Cathar had a stone that they carried and they prayed with. And I know you can explain it much more than me about what that stone was all about.
Well, that's one of the really interesting things that emerged for me, and I first heard about it in 2008. And I was talking to somebody who would have a lovely mystical sense about her. And we were talking about Montsegur. In the course of conversation, she sort of said, "Oh, I think they had stones. I don't know. They all seem to have a stone, a personal stone." So I went and I Googled stones, and I found a page saying that the Cathars all held a personal stone.
Hmm.
And then the page disappeared. I never saw that page again, and I didn't imagine it. It's one of those sort of things that happened with me when I was writing this book. And then 3 years later, I went. Another person, another mystic, arrived in from an island in the South Seas, and he was visiting a family member here in the south of France, and I knew he could see things, and I can't. I don't have that kind of gift. And I said, "Oh, would you come up, Montsegur, and tell me what the story is?" Because I was this stage, I was working on the book, and I had no idea how hard the poor man was working. But he came up and he started to tell me with the layout of the mountain and what he knew nothing about it. He knew none of the history. He's a man who lives in a completely different world, and we were sitting on the top of Montsegur, and if you've been there, Bart, if you can
Yes.
imagine looking out over that beautiful vista of the valleys with the birds there. There's a family of blackbirds that lives over there, and we were just looking at it. I said, he started to tell me that, he said, "Oh, they all had a stone. And on that stone, they chose a holy person would help them find a stone when they were about 7 or 8 years old. They would go to a river or they'd go somewhere where there were
Mhm.
a good selection of stones. And the child would find a stone that they felt resonated with their own soul. And then that stone became theirs for life. And on that stone, over their lifetime, they would etch an image of their own soul. And
Wow.
as they etched, they cleared themselves. They were clearing away what they no longer needed.
So when you mean etched, did you mean like they scratched and wrote or designed things on it that was their expression?
Yeah, he said they all had a little metal tool and they carried a little metal tool. He described the
Wow.
little metal tool to me, and it was just literally a scratching, probably like a nail, except that it was probably more specific. And they'd scratch in, probably a not very, and I think, as he said, because he's quite funny, and he said, "Oh, some people did a beautiful stone, some people couldn't do anything nice," but it wasn't. It was up to the it was always the individuals. And he said to me that there were strict rules. These stones were very, very precious to the person, and there were strict rules that you never swapped it, you never gave it away, you never you didn't bury it, and that when you died, somebody would take your stone, a holy person would take your stone and place it somewhere on the earth in remembrance of you.
Mm.
And he said that these stones were so precious, but he said, and I said to the Inquisition, not no, particularly as we know. Oh, I should have mentioned, for those not knowing the history of the Cathars, the Inquisition was established 11 years or 12 years before the siege at Montsegur, specifically to get rid of the Cathars. So they did exactly what we know the Inquisition did, which went into the villages to find out who was who, what was what, and get people to confess or to renounce or to submit. And
Yes,
and
yes.
some of
And just
those
to
Inquisition.
distract you about this a little bit, I want to stay on the stone because
Oh
there's
yeah,
so
I'm
much
coming back to that
more.
yet.
But there was how many people do you think were killed as Cathars during this genocide? Everybody has different numbers. I just wanted your opinion.
Well, there's I would never have added it up as such, Bart. That there were, there were awful stories where we have documentary evidence of what happened, obviously at Béziers, where the Archbishop said that they killed 20,000 people on Mary Magdalene's feast day in 1209, the 22nd of July, 1209. And then they went on to Minerve and they carried on through. This is now during the Crusade, which was part one of getting rid of the Cathars. So by the end of the Crusade in 1229, thousands of people had been killed, hundreds, thousands. I mean, they were very well documented. There were very well documented situations. So people would have died in the battles, but people were executed as well. But then you had a situation, and it's only human, that if that's the choice given to you and you've got a family with children, and what choice what is your choice? So the Inquisition was to do the good old-fashioned hearts and minds job. They were now moving in on just bringing people around to submitting to their way. And I said to my friend on the mountain about the stone, I said, surely the Inquisition knew about the stone. Surely this is something, because inquisitors would have come. Some of them would have been raised as Cathars. And he said it wasn't really until quite late on into the early 14th century that they registered that these stones were significant.
You told me in a conversation that there were stones in the museum at Montségur. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. And again, you see that I'm working with mystical information. As a historian, I have to qualify this. So there are stones there sitting there looking beautiful. And years ago, I had taken photographs. And just when I was doing these little clips I'm doing for my website, I sent the stones over. I sent a photograph to my informant to say, could you please read these stones for me? And he did. And he had additional information about how one of the stones was actually had been a swapped stone deliberately, that there had been a movement or a shift in the person, and they got a new stone. So there's more to be found out. And I'll tell you something else, Bart, that's really quite interesting.
Yes.
It's possible that that's the stones relating to the Cathars have been found on Skellig Michael out off the west coast of Kerry, because some stones there were found by archaeologists that were placed in a certain way, and they asked me about it, and I think and I sent them to my informant to ask him what he thought, and he identified several of the stones as having a Cathar energy about them. So it's a really interesting aspect of the story that I think is going to come out more and more. And I think there are a lot of people who know about it, and people who it resonates with them.
Yes. I think it's a good lesson for people in today, is that to find a spirituality that you can practice that nurtures and expresses something internally inside of you, as opposed to seeking something externally as a guide. And that was such a beautiful thing about the Cathars, is their autonomy. And the stone just really expressed that. We have a comment, and I just wanted to mention before I say the comment, we are on United Public Radio Network and UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 107.7 and 105.3. And we're also on Roku, Facebook, YouTube, and other means. And we also have Carrie Langdoch with a comment. She says, I think the age of 7 or 8 is highly important. That is the age that the ego mind starts forming more solidly, and we shift from deeper primary heart truth consciousness. So a stone would help remind them not to lose that heart and soul as their primary identity. Wow, that's beautiful, Carrie. And it really describes a lot what you're saying, that they are developing that, and it grows. And your character in your book, the lead character, a friend of mine and I were talking, yes, Esme, we're talking about this book, and we were just reflecting on, that, yes, it goes to a sad conclusion, but there is such strength in the book, and so much of it is expressed through the character of Esme. who is a young girl in the book, and she is right in the middle of it, learning, making mistakes, growing, and being led by something much greater than her. Is a great uh, expression, great character. Just see that, and Carrie is a fan. Love you both, and so happy to see you together. Uh, uh, I don't get that last word. My French is not as good as it should be. Um, I wanted to ask you a question because the Cathars are such. I always think of it as a more feminine-based religion or feminine-based practice. Excuse me. It probably steered away from religion, so to speak. Uh, what are your reflections about Mary Magdalene, and did she have any influence? I know this is, I mean, we really don't know. This is 2,000 years ago, and everybody has their own stories with Mary Magdalene, and there's not a lot of history, but we pull information together, and I wanted to see what you felt.
Well, there are a lot of clues. I would think. I would say. It's when you look at the early history, which is what I'm doing at the moment, the early history of Christianity, and you look at the Gnostic texts, and you look at how Christianity itself evolved, and you realize that in the first and second and third century, really until it became the official religion of the Roman Empire, Christianity was there was a purity about it. It was a personal journey. It was working with the words of Jesus. And I think very definitely, I think at this stage, it's generally agreed that Mary Magdalene came to the south of France, that she brought the teachings of Jesus with her. And my sense when I was working with the Cathars and the community on the top of the mountain, because they are more special. The mountain itself is more special than we can imagine. And the community itself is more special and more spiritual than we can imagine. And to try and trace it through straightforward history in some ways would
Hang on.
never do.
I think we had a little blip there.
Oh,
You said that the mountain is more special and then it blipped. Can you kind of say that again?
Yeah, we just recently got fiber optic. So it's click this every now and then. Yeah, the mountain is more special than we can imagine. And the community itself is more special than we can imagine. And to try and trace their way of being through straightforward history just simply isn't enough. And this is why going to their decision as to their choice, as to why they would make this terrible, terrible choice, is you have to go right deep into something much bigger than anything history can deliver on. So when you go back 48 generations is what we're talking. If we take 4 generations per century, you're back to the time of Mary Magdalene coming to the south of France with her group of people and spreading her word, spreading the teachings of Jesus. And in one of the Gospels, is it Thomas or Philip or John? One of those Gospels anyway, when the apostles are getting nervous about spreading the word of Jesus after the resurrection, and she says, look, get on with it. Go out there, you are protected, you are minded. There's that sense that she came to this part of the world where she probably had good connections. I think it's generally considered she was well-to-do. She would have had good connections. But we're also talking about coming to a place that is very much supporting humans in that very sacred feminine way. Because as you say in your opening, there are all these places where you can go and sit, and the resonance of it is so strong and minding and supportive that if you could imagine her coming to a place where people felt like that, where she was in some ways going into a place with an open door as opposed to going to a place where she would have had to push and struggle. And my sense is that through 48 generations, and this is where the bloodline comes into it. Through 48 generations, the teachings, the precise teachings, that perhaps even the Consolamentum, which was their one sacrament, was passed on without deviation, without messing, without ego, without somebody adding a bit or subtracting a bit.
And
As this,
was the consolidation ever written or recorded, or is it handed down verbally?
the consolamento was handed down through the holy people through an initiation. So it's an initiatory tradition. And unfortunately, because of the nature of it, it was easy to wipe out, and the Roman Church did wipe it out. So in the 14th century, it was gone. But I was given a little bit about it by one of the mystics. So in my book, you have Esme, the character, seeing half the ceremony, and then she had to close her eyes because that's all I was given. So I mean, I didn't make up anything in the book. That's in the book, I was given by a mystic.
Well, the book is a beautiful. It's a fictional book, of course.
It is fiction.
However, it traces through history very accurately and really puts you in the shoes of what it's like to be a Cathar at that time so well and so eloquently that you really feel the gritty life that they experienced and the spiritual life and the ecstasy of that, and the sophistication of it, of all of these matters. But one thing you brought up that I really like is you were talking about the land and as if it has a divine feminine vibration, or maybe we ought to take the divine out and just say it has a very feminine vibration that opens you to that type of awareness if you're willing to follow into it.
Yeah, well, you mentioned some of the places, and I was interested that you didn't mention the place, that you didn't mention the name of the place, the last one with the white lady, because there are some very, very special places here. And it's when you go, like, for example, I think you might have mentioned that I spent 60 hours in a cave.
Yes,
trying to tap into that notion, and the cave supported me, and I couldn't have just gone to any random cave. It wouldn't, a random cave wouldn't have given me what it gave me.
Let's do a little bit of background of the story. Catherine went into a, there's a very, where Montségur is located, is very much where the higher elevations begin in the Pyrenees Mountains. So it's in high mountains. And there's this one really large mountain to the south of Montségur called the Peak de Saint Barthélemy. And on the other side of the peak is the city of Tarascon and another little city called Onerlac-Estat-Laban. And in that area, there are 7 mystery caves, so to speak. I think there's a better term for that. And Catherine went into one of these caves called the Cathedral Cave, if I'm correct. Yeah. And I've been to these caves. My favorite is Grotte Le Bethlehem, but Catherine spent 60 hours in the Cathedral Cave to uncover something. It's like a Cathar would.
Well, yeah, because it was something, it was to, I mean, as I said, I spent 6 years working on this book, and a huge part of the question was why I couldn't finish the book until I got some hint of a sense as to why somebody would make a choice like that. You know, why didn't they find another way to die, like jump off the back of the mountain? Why didn't they cross their fingers and just swear something to Rome? Why didn't they just find a way to disappear? They didn't. This was very deliberate. It was for us, they did it. It was to hold the energy through the centuries is why, in my opinion, they did it. But to do this, I spent 60 hours in the cave, and it's a long time in the pitch dark. I went out every now and then for the call of nature and just to get warm because it was freezing. It was the middle of July and it was hot outside, but it was freezing in the cave. But at one point I woke up in the cave and I got this extraordinary sense of the oneness of my heart, just the strength of my heart, the perfectness in my heart. And it was a sensation so powerful and so real. And I feel that if they had that, if they knew that of themselves every minute of every day, because they devoted their lives so to prayer, if this is what they knew, to hand that away to somebody was to give away something far more than their earthly single life. It was to give away something so deep and so rich that they just simply couldn't do it. It was to condemn themselves to an eternity of awfulness, as opposed to holding what was true to them and sacrificing this one lifetime of many to hold this power in their heart, true and pure. And when I got that sensation, and I got that in the cave, and I know the cave, I wouldn't have got that even sitting 60 hours in another dark cave. I wouldn't have got that. I know this cave because I've been back to it, and it's got a lovely, lovely, lovely sense of it. There's a lovely sense. You just completely relax into it, and you can hear the rocks moving. It's got something about it. And
those caves are so special.
Yeah, they are.
And it's for me, it's connecting into the deepest of the deepest lights that opens you up to an infinite source, and it's always there for you. It's always your light. And if your whole culture practices what does your heart tell you and how deep you can go, just imagine what the collective consciousness of that would be. I always like to think of those caves as kind of the shadow side or the underbelly of the Cathar culture, whereas the Montsegur side was what was seen by the rest of the world. I mean, the little mountain, as you drive along the highways in this area, you'll see this little pog pop up in the mountain landscape with a little fortress on top of it, just like this. And it gives you a reminder. And as you said earlier, it was a reminder to everybody. But on the other side, where these 7 initiation caves are, this is where you did the deep work. It's just truly amazing. That was quite a journey. 60 hours. That's
about 2.5 days. No, about 2.5 days. But there were lots of other beautiful places I would go and spend a lot of time.
3.5 days. Oh, yes. Why is my math not working? I'm in my heart. I'm not in my head.
Yeah, but then there's also, the labyrinth, there's Galamoose. There are all these wonderful, beautiful places where
Yes.
they're full of joy and life and birds and butterflies and rivers and everything. And it's all what it's about. And it's just the beauty of this area is being able to sit and be and listen. And that's where you get a sense of a people who, as I say, lived in a completely different time to us, so different. But it was, being at one with the world, but one of the feminine, if the earth is the mother earth, being at one with mother earth and knowing who they were, and then following the Cathars followed the teachings of St. John. They had the Lord's Prayer, and I do believe that the teachings of Jesus and of Mary Magdalene and of really, in some ways, I suppose, the Gnostic tradition, but it was always, and I mean, this is in the Roman Catholic tradition as well. If you look at St. Anthony, the 3rd, 4th century saint, St. Anthony, he was one of the Desert Fathers, and Galamoose is dedicated to him. Bart,
Yes.
you will know Galamoose really well.
Tell you a little bit about the Hermitage Galamoose. Yeah. For those who do not know, it was founded in the 3rd and 4th centuries, probably much more ancient than that.
Yes.
And a cave that they put a church in, and still there's a church there today in this cave that's at the end of a gorge that is unbelievably gorgeous. But the light in that cave, and I'm talking about the energetic, spiritual light, is overwhelmingly powerful.
Very powerful. And St. Anthony, who was one of the great saints, early saints of the Roman Catholic tradition, he said, you reach God through your own heart. And of course, he was speaking before it became the official religion of the Roman Empire. But his teachings, his words that were all recorded back in the 3rd and 4th, the 3rd and 4th century. Yeah, the Desert Fathers and the Desert Mothers, he talks about you everything is through your own heart. You've reached God through your own heart, and people went to him for sayings. So it is there in the Roman Catholic teachings, but somehow it got packaged in a way, and you can see why it might have gotten packaged.
Yes.
To help people to understand, but then to not then give people the scope. And having been raised in the Roman Catholic tradition, for which I'm now grateful for, but it was very tricky, it was very dogmatic, and everybody, at least so many of my generation, simply moved away from it. And then something
you were a good Irish girl practicing Catholicism in Dublin.
Oh God, yeah.
We can only imagine.
And educated by the Dominicans extremely well too.
Yes, and I think it's one of the basic teachings of Jesus that is often forgotten. One of the things that he brought in is the heart consciousness. That's what we trust. Before that, I don't. I just wonder how they expressed love through the heart, if it was even there. And this is a concept that the author Richard Rudd, who wrote the Gene's Keys, expresses that was Christ's greatest message, was heart consciousness. Mm. And we have a comment from Carrie Langdock. Again, I believe they knew, I guess, the Cathars, and committed to that is a better to stay in the holy joy of heart Christ consciousness, purity of spirit, even though the flesh may burn and be crucified on the cross. And that's so much happened, particularly in Montsegur.
Well, I think when you sit into the people who were on Montsegur, and these were people who were very devoted. They devoted their lives to prayer. So they were very holy people, and they were holding a pure, if you like, this is now moving beyond our three dimensions. They were holding an energy, a pure Christian energy for us all. And we also know that they used astrology and that they chose their day. And astrologers have written about the day that they chose, the 16th of March, 1244, as a time when they will be back in 777 years and 800 years. Now, they will be back now with their story, which is there. So the energy is there for us to reach and to reawaken. And this is why we use the word transformation.
And what you're telling is that something was going to be uplifted after 777 years, which was 2020. Is that correct?
2021, I think. Yeah, 2021
okay. Yes.
was the big ceremony, and the laurel will be back.
Oh yes.
But I think it's also, it's all of what so many people listening to this will be aware of: the age of Aquarius, the whole new way coming in, and for Christianity is such a huge and important tradition certainly in Western Europe, that to be able to reach through what I would have been raised with, to reach through that to what is pure and good, and is still, in a way, fundamentally held by the Roman Catholic Church, is, they've allowed me, for example, to reach back and find something that I suppose karmically or through my lives forgotten, because obviously 800 years of Inquisition and terror, if you said the wrong thing, is going to have some sort of an effect on all of us. But suddenly for that to be released, with an apology, from Rome, with an acknowledgement that this was maybe not the right thing to do, with the freeing up of that, we can go back and with more scriptures, with more words, with more information coming through, with more historical material coming through. There's just so much more for us to reach. And that's why, to me, the Cathars are transformational, because they're this story of an extraordinary people who died 800 years ago, who were virtually wiped out 700 years ago, and yet somehow they capture our imagination, and they have something that we just want, and we know what it is, but we just have to reach it ourselves.
And one point is I've been to Montsegur several times, and I always felt like when I was at the base of the mountain, it was highly energized. There's two ley lines
Mm,
that converged at that point on that mountain.
mm,
And as I went up, there was no energy. And when you get to the top, there's nothing. It feels like it's constipated, so to speak. And myself doing, I do all kinds of energetic work with land and stuff. Of course, I couldn't move it, and I would imagine there's been hundreds of people going up there doing rituals and all kinds of stuff to go. We're going to heal the land here, so
mm.
everything would come together, and nothing ever happened. Uh, and then 2021 came around, and I went up to the mountain that spring, and all of a sudden, it was very different. It was almost as if a new energy was coming up into it, as if the flowers were starting to bloom again, energetically speaking. It really made me a believer. For me, that's a reality I can trust, is how everything feels energetically. And I think they really completed it. And therefore, it's alive. And maybe that's also a good thing for us to really consider, that we do not have to overcome the Catholic Church, but follow our hearts, just like the Cathars did. The stories are still there. And just like your book, Montsegur, it gives this guidance to really trust inside of yourself, that that's bigger than anything that you're going to encounter, whether you're going to be burned in a on fire, or have a virus, or have a car wreck, or whatever you're going to run into, or you're going to be bigger than that. So that was always my biggest message with that. So I just want to ask you a question. With now that you've written Montsegur, uh, where do you think your spiritual direction is going? Any anything that's gone into? Because
Well, yeah. I suppose there'd be two questions. One is my spiritual direction, and one would be what I'm going to do with, you know,
what's next?
what's next. I'm loving doing my little videos for my website. So I've done 3 of those, and I've got a few more, because what they're doing is they're forcing me to go back into the early history. I'm so interested in the early history of Christianity. And because I do think I genuinely am grateful to the Roman Catholic Church for holding so much and making so much. I mean, they make the words of Jesus available. I am the way, the truth, and the light. I mean, you find yourself calling on things that you learned as a kid in class, with the nuns. So in that sense, but what I'm really interested in is sort of, for myself, untangling that early history in a way that makes sense today and builds on that. But that would be my professional work, where my own. The one thing that I had mentioned to you before, Bart, when we were talking about this, is that how transformational the Cathars themselves can be, because when we step into their world and when we try to grasp and hold and know what they know, and to try and feel that little hint from a 21st century mind into a 13th century humanity, they're two wildly different worlds, and yet they have something to give us. So the more I go into the way of the Cathars, the more I sit in the places, in the beautiful places around here, and just feel the energy and listen to what's going on around me.
And what they were connected to is just another
It's what?
question. Because this is an ancient land,
Yeah.
and for example, when you go into the initiation caves, um, they may have been used uh, so many years before, uh, 10, 20, 30,000 years ago. We really don't know how old those things are.
Yeah.
And who in the devil put a 3-ton rock on 3 round stones in the middle of this cave? This is such a ancient technique, to be able to lift a rock like that up onto 3 perfectly round stones in a cave, and then carve out a pentangle that you can climb into. And if you do, it connects you to another spiritual world. Let's put it in short.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's what that to me is part of the Cathars world, is to go deeply into that, because this is one of their most sacred caves.
Yeah. And it's ultimately into balance is what we're all, in ourselves, in our communities, is going into the balance of the masculine and the feminine, of the sacred,
Yes,
the sacred, divine, masculine, feminine, and to find that balance. And in some ways, that the Cathars would have had a strong sense of the balance, certainly a strong sense of that feminine, that sacred feminine, that
yes.
was in conflict with the good old fashioned Roman Empire way of doing
But
things.
maybe they used her divine masculine, but just to get the job done, like plow the fields, you know, mine for silver, and do those practical things that move us. But yet they did not choose to do it in aggression, because I never read any stories that they actually had conflict with the Catholic Army.
No, so conflict would be the wrong word, but no, they weren't the ones with they didn't, they didn't start the fight at all.
Yeah, yeah, not at all. And they stayed in this secret hidden world in southwest France.
Mm.
There's so many secrets in the Pyrenees. We certainly don't know them all. I just learned a new power spot this last week in Quiza, of this, what would you call it? A, a portal stone, like in Ireland, when you have one stone, flat stone, and three stones underneath it.
A dolmen.
A dolmen, yes.
Yeah.
And it's right outside the town of Quiza along the Odd River.
Oh.
It's like, where have you been all my life? Uh, and it's kind of hidden in plain sight. If you're a Facebook friend of mine, you can find it on my Facebook page. So they're just everywhere here, of all of these magnificent places that are very connected. Um, so just just want to ask you another just off the wall question. Renly Chateau, reflections to share with those about the world famous church, Renly Chateau.
Sorry, you just broke up there a little bit to share my thoughts. I love Rennes le Chateau. I remember listening to a talk by the late Henry Lincoln about how Rennes le Chateau, using sacred geometry, he used the local 6 inches to the mile sort of maps to create the sacred geometry of the geometry of the region. And he said Rennes le Chateau, with the 5 mountains around it, created the shape of Venus. So,
Wow.
Rennes le
So
Chateau.
would that be Bugarash, the Bazoo, Cardew, those
I'm
mountains?
not sure. I think it's all on his website. I was
Mm,
eavesdropping in a lecture he was giving to a group, but it just resonated with me because I
yeah.
love the story of Rennes le Chateau, the church with the stations of the cross, all the messages, all the signs, and there's a lovely sort of an industry around it. But there's something so special there, particularly at night. It's just got
It
a
is. It is.
magic.
It's only 10 kilometers from my house, and I drive up there all the time,
Yeah,
and sit and there's these big beacons of energy that come out of the land if you're sensitive enough to feel them,
yeah,
and just to feel it penetrate your body
mm,
as well as the church.
yeah.
It's just amazing. And wow, here we are on United Public Radio Network and UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 107.7 and 105.3 with Catherine de Courcy. And also, you can catch these shows on Roku. And Catherine, I just really appreciate you being on the show today. Um, just a wonderful. If there's anything I could describe about you, it's enthusiasm and just love for this culture and this land and these people. Uh, and you get this all in your book, Monsieur, about that. So it's really a great read. Um, I'm reading it my second time just to get the feel of it again. But it's a wonderful journey to take off. So I'm hoping you have another book in you like this, personally.
I'd love
Uh,
another. We'll see what happens.
yeah, yeah. So any parting words?
Um, no, but I'm just very grateful to you, Bart. It's been lovely chatting with you, and it's just I just love living around here and meeting all of the people who come and go from here and gather here, particularly in the summer. It's a very nice. It's just a lovely atmosphere. And I just would say one thing about my book in that there is a bit of violence, but I've kept it to an absolute minimum because sadly there was violence towards the Cathars, but I've tried to put in the hope and the joy and the love of the people, make that the
Yeah,
dominant thing.
yeah. It'll never make American television. It's not violent enough. So I think you're good with that.
That's a compliment.
Yeah. And we had one past thing is Carrie Languedoc was asking, did you publish through Astara
Yeah,
Flower
the Star
Press?
Flower Life Press. I did, yes, in America. Yeah, yeah, she
Okay.
published it for me. Yes, I was
All right.
delighted.
And you
Yeah.
can also get all of this on Catherine's work on Amazon and other things. So check her out. Just Google her up and you'll find her. And thank you so much. We're going to
Thank
have to go, and we'll see y'all next Wednesday with Becoming Quantum Consciousness. My name is Bart Sharp on UPRN, UFO Paranormal Radio, and Roku. Thank you so much. Bye bye.